Good morning, mathematicians. This is Miss Lehman. I wanted to talk to you today about the powers of 10. In fact, these powers of 10 are almost like superpowers because they can make us solve some very complicated math problems in a snap. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. When you see a power of 10 problem, it'll look something like this. You may see two different factors, but one of those factors is a power of 10. So here we see 10 to the power of 2, which we know means 10 times 10, or 100, because 10 times 10 equals 100. So we see one of those factors is a power of 10, and that should help us. That waves that white flag, and that tells us, oh, I don't need to stack and solve this problem. Instead, there's a more efficient strategy. Now, when it comes to powers of 10, the key to deciding how to solve it in a snap is to notice two things. One thing that you must notice is ask yourself, is this a multiplication question or a division question? Because that is going to tell you which direction the decimal point is going to move. Okay, then you also want to take note. The second thing that you want to ask yourself is, how many times will I move my decimal point? And when your power of 10 is written like this, then the answer to the question is whatever the exponent is. So here the exponent is 2. So we are going to move our decimal point 2 times. And because this is multiplication, we are going to move our decimal point 2 times to the right. Okay? I have some silly sayings that I have said with the kids for years and years when it comes to these power of 10 questions that have helped us to remember the directions that we move in. Sometimes they feel kind of silly to have these funny phrases, but I'll tell you, one time I had a student taking a very important test, and when the student took the test, when he first looked at a question, I could see his face looked so serious, and then all of a sudden he started smiling. And later on that day, of course, he didn't tell me the specifics of the question that he was on, but he said, oh, Miss Lehman, when I first looked at this question, I wasn't sure what to do with it, but then one of those silly songs that you had us sing to remember things came to my mind, and I knew just what to do. So that may happen to you someday. You never know. Now, what we have always said when it comes to powers of 10 questions is when we multiply, we go to the right, to the right, to the right, 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 to the right, to the right, to the right, 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 to the right, to the right, to the right, 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 to the right, to the right, right, right. Now, dividing is going to be quite different, and we'll have something different that we say for that. But again, that's the key. Anytime you see a power of 10 question, you ask yourself two things. What direction do I move my decimal in, and how many times do I move it? If it's multiplication, you move to the right, to the right, to the right, right, right. And for this question, we know that we're going to move 2 times to the right because that's what our exponent tells us. Okay, when you go to record that answer, what you're going to do first is simply rewrite the digits that you had as your other factor. So my other factor here was 8 and 764 thousandths. I'm going to rewrite just the digits of the number 8764. Then you take your decimal point and you initially place it where it was. So the decimal point was here between the 8 and the 7. But remember, the multiplication sign told me to move my decimal to the right. The exponent 2 told me to move it 2 times. So watch, as I solve this, all I'm going to do is take this decimal point. I'm going to move it 1 time, 2 times. I moved it to the right 2 times, and look, magically, I've arrived at my new answer. Now again, guys, it's not really magic. It's just math. But again, it helps us to solve this in a snap. We didn't have to stack and solve. We didn't have to multiply 8 and 764 thousandths times 100 by stacking and solving using that algorithm. No, you save yourself the time by simply moving the decimal point to the direction that it goes. All right. Now, sometimes you will see powers of 10 expressed in different ways. Here, it's expressed as an exponent. But I do want you to remember, and of course, when I do this, my decimal point is going to be stationary because this is an image. So I'm going to put that up top, and I'm going to come back and type for you. Remember, guys, that 10 to the power of 2 take away this highlight so you can see what I am typing. 10 to the power of 2, guys. We talked about exponents early this year when we were doing the order of operations, okay? And you need to remember that that exponent is a little teeny tiny but very bossy number. Do you remember this conversation that we had? Really, it bosses the bigger number, and it says multiply yourself together however many times I am. Well, this 10 to the power of 2 tells the 10, multiply yourself together 2 times, so it means 10 times 10, right? We also know that when we solve 10 times 10, that would equal 100. So notice, any of those 3 expressions or terms are powers of 10. So instead of 10 to the power of 2, we could have it written as just 100. We could also have it written as 10 times 10. But again, those are powers of 10. So we can do that handy dandy trick of asking ourselves, what direction do I move and how many times? What direction I move depends on the operation. If it's multiplication, we go to the right, to the right, to the right, right, right. And how many times I move is answered by what my exponent is, how many zeros I have in the number, if it's something like 100, 1,000, 10,000, or how many 10s are being multiplied together if we have it expressed in that way. Okay, let's try one more. Yes, let's have one more question. You'll notice that this has a lot of similarities, but then one big difference. Here, when I see this question and I ask myself the 2 questions, I'm going to ask myself, what direction do I move and how many times? Well, the what direction do I move this time is going to be different because I'm looking at division. Now, when we divide things, guys, we're putting them in small, we make them smaller, right? Generally, when we divide, we make things smaller. So we're going to move our decimal point actually to the left when we divide because that makes things smaller when we move our decimal point to the left. Now, again, you know that there's going to be a silly little saying that's going to go with this. And this is what I've always done with my students to remember that, okay? We say this, when we divide, we become less. Move the decimal point to the left. Say that with me, ready? When we divide, we become less. Move the decimal point to the left. Okay, now, in this problem, we are going to move our decimal point to the left, and we're going to move our decimal point to the left 2 times because that's what our exponent tells us. So just like before, the first thing you do is you just rewrite the digits in that other factor that's not the power of 10. And then take that decimal point and put it where it was. Then remember, you're going to move your decimal point to the left, because we're dividing, 2 times, because that's what your exponent tells you. So I'm going to move it 1 time around the 8. Then I'm going to move it 1 additional time. Uh-oh, I don't have a digit to move my decimal point around here. But that's okay. We know that zeros serve as placeholders, so we can plug that decimal point in the front, put a 0 there, so that again, my decimal may have started here in the factor, but I moved it 1 time, then 2 times. Sometimes you have to plug in those placeholder zeros so that you can show what happens in that quotient, okay? All right, guys, this is a very quick mini lesson on powers of 10. It was important that we go over this because you will find that some of your questions, especially today that are involving multiplying decimals, you can do more efficiently by thinking about those powers or the superpowers of 10.